Hello and welcome back. My name is Sean and we have returned to the kind of joking purgatory that is my Reaper's Gale spoiler talks. Now, I finished book 2 in 2023 and I wrote my notes and then I recorded a video and then my hard drive died. And then I recorded another video and the sound wasn't turned on. So we're going back at it again for a third time. I have started reading book 3 as of the time of recording this video. So not only will this be less concise because we're now going on weeks since I finished book 2 and also multiple technical errors that have prevented this from getting out. But we're here, we're going to put it out there anyway. So if I'm missing a few details, I apologize. It's not as fresh as it was, and if I don't just push through this book, I don't think I'm ever going to push through this book, so we're just going to go ahead and dive into it. But like I said, if I miss anything, please let me know down below once I finish all of these spoiler talks in the book. I'm planning on doing a much more highly produced video. If you notice, this will not have many edits, if at all, just to get it out there, and then anything you say will be helpful because I will have to combine a bunch of notes just to put a high effort video after I'm done. But getting into the first chapter of book 2, chapter 7. So this was a great one to jump into at the end of my Reaper's Gale spoiler 1 book talk. I thought that it was kind of slow and I wasn't really getting into it just to pick up this chapter 7, and it was immediately like a bunch of plot happening, a bunch of my favorite characters came back, and just a lot of moving pieces like happening. Unfortunately, it slowed down a bit after this, but this is one of the things that I love about Malazan is you get all this build up into anticipation, and sometimes you just get these like really cool massive payoffs, and that definitely happened in this book. But to start out with, you have the boat carrying many main characters finally return to the shores, and there were a lot of noticing going on that when the Editor actually returned with all these new challengers to face their emperor, amongst other things, that there weren't actually a lot of Editor waiting for them. In the previous books, you're seeing a lot of machinations that are happening by the Lethri, and it seems like they are further and further displacing the Editor in what they're supposed to be subjugated. But the Lethri are just such politically savvy, corrupt people that they're starting to actually, instead of fight against the slavery and conquering that they were happening, instead just rise to those ranks and just become bigger parts of this through many different types of treachery and political maneuvering. So kind of interesting come up on there. There's a bit of philosophizing that happens with Tarlac Reed that goes on there just because, one common thing is that they're trying to get people to actually to fight Rulad because he is the crippled god's chosen. And it's like, how would you even like fight against the gods chosen? But he has some philosophizing just from being like one of the representatives of the Nameless One that the gods chosen normally always fail, which is kind of an interesting take. The gods in this universe are definitely flawed, and having the backing of one doesn't really mean anything in this universe. You do get a lot of power, but when you have so many weird gods and plots and stuff happening, moving all around, it's not the guarantee that you would hope it to be in those scenarios. Earlier in like the books, I think it was like book 1 or 2, it was just like constantly repeated. Like the best thing that you could happen is just to be completely unnoticed by the gods, because, if they notice you and they start using you, then your life just becomes very weird and bad. So you're definitely seeing more of that. But what was really cool was that when Ikarim actually got off the ship, the land itself recognized him. You had earthquakes, the elder gods in the cities all started like perking up. The cities, the ghost, everyone was just like, holy shit, he's here. And it's just interesting because in the earlier books, you keep hearing about just how badass Ikarim is and how he's just this ultimate destroyer. But in like book 4, when we meet Karsa, he has a duel against them. And while Karsa is a very overpowered character, at that time he wasn't really so I don't think you got the full extent of what Ikarim could actually do. But seeing in like the previous book, him going against like Throne of Shadow and some of the other things, he's definitely growing as he's awakened, and I don't think we've ever fully seen like what he actually is capable, and just seeing everyone's reaction to him is pretty surprising. Even like Elder God Bug managed to go and like, oh no, he's here. stuff's moving, anticipation's happening. So one of the more interesting characters, and it's cool just to see just the shockwaves that just a simple stepping on the shore of a continent can like inspire in the world around it. Karsa too, he is always a joy when he goes into a new city. There is a reoccurring theme of him just beating up whatever guards actually try to give him shit. You know, they try to do normal guard stuff and then put like rule and order, but you can't really contain that level of barbarianism, because he once again just picks them up, throws them around, and very perceptive despite all of the muscle bound hulking and throwing people around. There's a lot of resident gods and spirits that are watching them that he like notes of that, but he's always very surprising in his like cunning and his perception. It's easy to forget as he's just like tossing horses and just beating the shit out of people that he actually is one of the more intelligent characters in this series, it seems like. We're back also to see a little more of Tanal and just how much of a weird creep he is. Very much do not like this character, but I've liked the interactions between him and Janeth, mainly because it gave Janeth a chance to actually shine and just show how cool of a character she is, how good she is at just like turning the script on him. And despite being like chained up in a dungeon and being tortured, she always seems to have like the mental upper hand and just can just wreak mental havoc on them. But the downside of that is that Tanal now thinks that he's just madly in love with her and like, you know, he can't keep his plaything in there, but if he can get her somewhere else and move her, then maybe he can finally inspire like the love he so desperately wants for her. But it's a lot, real weird, real creepy. Do not like this character. I don't think that he will be redeemed, but I don't think even if that he went through that arc, that just all the shit he's done in the beginning, there's not really any coming back from that for me. But luckily, Bug, while he was going around doing Elder God things, actually discovers that she is there and decides to rescue her, bring her back, and just to have kind of like a fun reaction that like, oh hey, Tehal and her actually know each other. It's like, where's gonna happen with that? Tehal's acting a little weird, so super excited for the interactions that will occur between those two, you know, mad genius, and then just the intel like fortitude and just how like smart Janeth is. I think it'll be a fun combination, and it definitely will play out fun in the later chapters. Also, with Ubala Pung, he notices Karsa arrives, and that starts setting a few things in motion. You know that he is part Tarthanol, and those actually are from the same race, as a little less purebred than like Karsa, and immediately starts saying like, hey, we need to go meet this guy. So I think it'll be cool just to see the convergence that is just having like Karsa meet or maybe even join forces with like Bug and Tehal. What's going to happen when you have that cunning savage barbarian match up with like the genius that is Tehal and now Janeth? It just seems like it'd be a fun little combination of everything. Chapter 8. So we started out with Cotillion talking to Quick Ben, letting him know that Callum actually got saved and he made it to the Azeth house. So I don't think this is going to be the last we see of Callum, which is great because he's definitely one of my favorite characters in this series. So I really do hope he comes back. And then also it'll be cool to see just how he is, if he gets any special sort of things from actually being part of the Azeth house or not. But I'm excited for him to come back. And Cotillion's quickly becoming one of my favorite characters. He seems to be one of the only like gods that is like in action that we see that seems to actually have empathy and care, and maybe it's just because we see more of him than we do for the former emperor, but I really enjoy his character and like a lot of the philosophizing that he happens like with his character. And he tells a little bit more about the actual like realm of shadow, how it absorbs other things and how it's constantly moving and how that plays into kind of the nature of that realm and how that's different from other realms. So a lot more like mystery about like Warren slowly being revealed. 7 books in, I think I have a general understanding of what Warren's work, but it just seems to just get a little more detail as we go through, and just what you thought, you know, it's just like, nope. Here's 6 more hidden things that you had no idea about. We also get to see Shurkagin in this chapter. So she is now a pirate with a crew of merry men and just starting to go port town to port town. I don't have a lot to say about her in this chapter other than I like the interactions between her and the characters. And I think just being an undead thief, now also a pirate, is just a fun little thing. And I think she will play a pretty interesting part in this book. But it's cool to see her. Nothing really like stood out for me for her in this chapter. And then we're back to our merry band of complainers, Udanas, Silchas Ruin, and everyone else. And once again, we're getting more kind of like bickering. And this one is not as bad, but we do get a lot of kind of cool lore dumps in this and sudden like conflict set up in the future. Udanas is also a very interesting character. He is way smarter than you thought in the other books, and he is constantly having like the best philosophical points, but he winds up surprising everybody, just saying like he doesn't blame Rulad for his actions. he blames the crippled god, but just actually going and like trying to put all of the blame that the Etter has faced on the crippled god is just not a mistake, and it's too simple just because the Etter were chosen for a reason. There's a reason the crippled god wasn't trying to like come and corrupt the Lethri. It was like how the social hierarchy of the Etter actually came together and allowed him to be as effective as he is. And the Etter versus Lethri is a lot of big sociological changes between the two of them that I'll probably talk more about in my big video. But just kind of interesting point after interesting point that it brings up. Silchas also brings a lot of things where they talk about how they're all searching for Scavendar's soul, but like they all want to do very different things with it. So you know there's going to be a future conflict with it, which I'm not sure is how it's going to resolve, because Silchas Ruin continues to be more and more of a badass. And, you know, it's throwing like him or any like the Red brothers against like really anybody. I don't know how they're going to actually pull that off or what's going to happen with it, but you know that their little happy merry band of complainers is going to have absolute conflict in the future, and it'll be cool to see how that all plays out. It's also revealed that the jacket ritual of like ice is now failing, so glaciers are moving, so you know that big things are happening in the world again, because that's been like a really solid part about it for a very long time. So the world's changing, and we're going to see the effects of that, I think, pretty soon. The group also gets a new guide that is the Mortal Sword of Animander Rake, and it's going to be interesting because they're getting sent off to actually redirect the Spear of Amtas Valak, and you find out a little bit more like the reason that there are so many ghosts for the Etter to actually like control and use like in their conflict is that the ritual of Amtas Valak actually like defied Hood himself, and so he was mad, so their spirits are just kind of like around, and it's just cool little lordom to like wire things this way if you start like paying more attention. But I'm sure that's going to play in further, because if they are going to do something with the ritual and suddenly like the ritual gets dispelled or it fails, it's just going to be interesting. It's how that's going to play back in with those ghosts and just the Etter at large in general. Now there are also a bunch of moving parts in this chapter for the Etter and the Lethri. Brol gets sent out from the Lethri just to stop all these killings that are happening by like Red Mask and the All, so he's going to try to stop this like rebellion and killing from getting like bigger and bigger. But we know that Red Mask has been doing a lot of stuff in the background just to like make sure that this wasn't going to be a simple they're just going to come in and subjugate the All again or exterminate them. So definitely setting up some future conflict. There's also a growing conspiracy from amongst the Etter to actually do something about Rulad, and the Etter just in general are getting really sick of like the Lethri and just like how corrupt they actually are, and there are talks happening of trying to wage a war against their corruption, which if we look at history in general, we know that that's never a clean thing whatsoever and can lead to just a lot of just weird things happening. McCarthyism just jumps to mind, and when you have an insane emperor to begin with and just that much political instability, I'm sure it's going to be a lot of weird moving pieces moving forward. Red Mask and Talk, now that they're united, are talking about the best way to actually go and fight against the Lethri. Red Mask acknowledges that like, hey, the All style, while that is like the honorable way of fighting, just isn't going to do it. Talk suggests that, hey, maybe we can do something different. Maybe you can start learning Malazan style tactics, and it's going to be interesting, especially if Talk starts like teaching them just the Malazan way of fighting, just because the Malazans, they are the empire for a reason and have managed to conquer many different things. And we know that they are also coming on the doorstep for this big war that's eventually going to happen between them. So what's going to happen if the All start getting a foothold? Are they going to start to ally with the Malazans, especially if like Talk is involved with that, just because we know there are going to be familiar faces to Talk on their way. So it's very interesting to see, just seeing the tribal sort of nomads of the All actually start getting like full-on military training, especially when that is paired with Red Mask and him being the first sort of the Kachen Jamal. It's a lot of cool things, and this book is very good at just like setting up all these cool things that I'm going to hope for a major payoff, but based off the comments and what I've talked about others, I think my expectations are going to be just completely thrown somewhere else. So I know it's going to happen eventually, but I'm very intrigued just to see, with all these pieces being set up, what the final payoff of this is going to eventually be. Chapter 9, we have more ascendant weirdness that's happening that is not fully explained, but you know is going to be critical for plot reasons later. But Sukul frees her sister from the Azath and swears revenge. They have a plot to actually trap Menandor and then also ruin Meandor. When I don't listen to the audiobook, a lot of these names I definitely am just completely butchering with my pronunciation, so Sorry. Samur has some talks about just how unkillable Rulad actually is and how underneath the city there is a lot of weird energy that is gathering and doing weird things that I'm sure also will be plot relevant. Definitely something big building, and that we know that is going to pay off eventually going on there, and something that multiple people now have mentioned. So whenever you see that mentioned multiple times, you know it's going to be something big. We're back with a Tarlac V POV, and he realizes that he sucks, which he does. So I'm glad that he is also realizing it, but also just the idea that the nameless ones and sort of what we've seen of them so far, just they don't really make the best decisions, and you don't really know exactly what their motivations are for even unleashing Ikarim, but it just seems like they're playing with something that they do not fully understand. And part of that, the more people hear about Ikarim's arrival, the more people flee, once again signaling just how significant Ikarim is as a character. So I'm pretty excited to see what's going to happen with him, especially when you start getting to the confrontations between him and Emperor Rulad. We also get to see the Errant again in this chapter, and you know he was the master of the holds, so a lot of interesting things and lore backgrounds with like this character talking. You know, he is master of the holds, and he thinks that the entire hold system has just completely failed. And we also find out that the Four Gorilla Sail were the ones that actually came and injured him and kind of like broke him and made him much weaker than he is now. We haven't seen a lot of them up to this point, but when we do see him, it's just like straight savage, creepy, just brutality. And we also heard some warnings for, you know, the master of the deck, Perun, just how that they hate change and they just want stability. And it seems like there are a lot of weird things happening lately that are probably in the face of stability. So I'm actually pretty excited to see when they're going to enter into the fray and like how that's actually going to look like, because so many plots, so many things happening, so many big moving pieces. It seems like that's a lot of chaos, which they supposedly hate. Also, an interesting moment, Fenner has come seeking sanctuary, and it's not from any of the things, but actually from his followers themselves, which is just another weird mechanic of how Ascendance and the Gods work that I don't fully understand. But Errant gives it to him just to kind of give him some rest, and then also we find out that the Hold of Beast has awakened. Featherwitch, she's back. She is now starting to make some moves, so we're going to see how that all plays out, just because she is a very conniving character. So it'll be interesting to see what she actually comes up with, but she starts bringing up and wondering about Udanos and Meandor and just sort of that weird sort of history that they have together and what's actually going to come about it. But she is now trying to move into the mix as well and throw her hat into the already very crowded ring. And there is also a raid on the South quarters by the secret police, just going a whole sort of like flood of just like betrayal, confessions, and just more of that kind of McCarthyism sort of search for corruption. I don't have a lot to say about it, but it's just very interesting and something I'll talk more about in my bigger video of just how like even within the external factors of all the things that are facing like the Outer Empire now, just how convoluted and weird the internal politics are. And just whenever you have something that you have to call a secret police, just how messy that gets. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, just because they have been going and facing off against Tehol just unknowingly. So a lot of moving stuff here, but with the grand scope of like everything else that's been happening, I will admit that they have been some of the things I've been paying the least attention to. So I'm gonna have to go back and take some notes when I do my big video, just to like fully better track what's happening. That's the thing about these books, it's just so many things happen, and if you're not just actively taking notes on everything as you're like reading it, things slip through the gap. I'm excited for a reread just so I can pick up some of the things that are happening. And also, after all of this kind of like heaviness and like plot stuff that's been going up there, we finally have Janeth wake up, and then there is just hilarity between her and Tehol. Turns out Tehol was her student and had a massive crush on her and was just a funny tale of just unrequited like love. But after all like just the horrific things that she has gone through, she was just like very much like appreciative to like run back into him and be able to laugh again, just because it reminded her of much better days. But I really do enjoy the interactions between those two characters. I feel like Tehol in general is a good point of comedic relief, and throwing Janeth into the mix there was everything I had hoped for. And we finally get some more Ikarim POVs, and now that he's starting to awaken more and not just be kind of like a meandering demented child, it's a very interesting character. He's more than just a weapon. He's starting to show a lot more empathy and just talking about sort of the trap that is just worshiping God and how like just flawed the Nameless are. They're just basically worshipping dead stones rather than actually focusing on the living. Very interesting. He is a very complex character and definitely one that I want to just like do a complete deep dive on him just by himself whenever I finish up the series. Getting into chapter 10. There's a lot that happens in this book. Oh my god. We start out with Hedge's POV, and he finds the skeleton of a dragon. Once again, there is a lot of weird connections between dragons and warrens and how the magic system works and just how there is a related dragon to each warren, and just haven't got the full picture yet, so not something I can really go too far into, but another one of these Malazan mysteries that you'd think by book 7 you know a bit more about, but Erikson just keeps building and building. But there is a lot of foreshadowing in his POV about the upcoming like ice and snow going on there. We know that there are groups headed towards Omtas Falak and finding the ritual ice spear, and just a lot of things with like how that ritual of the jagged is failing. So it's going to be interesting because you're now having this hit over and over and over again. So I think that there is going to be some big repercussions that are going to happen with like this jagged ritual that may or may not actually be tied into Ikram, but I'm really curious to see what is going to do that. Whenever Erikson just like repeatedly hammers you with the same sort of foreshadowing over and over again, then you know something's going to be up. Troll, Onrak, and Quickman are crossing the Shadow Lake, and actually in a conversation with Onrak, Troll discovers that he has been chosen to be the Knight of Shadows, which he doesn't really want to be or understand why he'd be chosen for that, but it's revealed that just by the sheer fact that he stood up to Ikram, that is something that was worthy enough for him to be chosen for it. And Troll is an interesting character that I also want to do a deep dive on, because you don't really get a lot of like why he's such a cool character in the first book that you're introduced to him, but as you go on and you just find out what a great warrior he is, and he's definitely one of the more complex characters in there. One of the few with the actual mental and internal fortitude to stand up against his culture's sort of rigidity and just the going along with the conquest things. He's always been outspoken and just the first one to step forward and like question things. So I think he'd actually be a pretty good one to have one of these like deck-like positions. Back to Ruin's group, and they're still complaining, but there is a sort of like snippy argument back and forth between Udanas and Fear, and he starts poking fun about the fact about like how like Saren and like Fear like each other, but like Fear just won't make a move because of his brother, and how that's like actually a betrayal, but he was actually betraying more. But he gets punched in the face, and you find out that Fear actually giving Saren his sword has a lot deeper meaning and may even be some sort of like weird betrothal thing. I don't know, but every time we go back to this group, there is some sort of internal strife and conflict as they slowly move forward towards their eventual goal. So I think I'll be pretty happy when this group actually disbands, but there is a lot of cool philosophy that comes out from all of these interactions, and just seeing the interplay between them can be entertaining, or it can drag on a bit too long, but a lot of stuff happening. I love Talk, so getting back into him was pretty interesting. You know, in the previous book that he was actually like reborn into one of the children of the dead seed's body, and they were all cannibals, so it was kind of a shock to him to find out that his body still craved eating people. So Talk is just completely cursed, and he can never like catch a break, and he does a lot of speculation on this, kind of cursing the gods. It's like, why is he constantly being like forced in this role of soldier because he doesn't want it? I really hope if any character gets like a happy ending in Malazan, then he is the one, because he's just been getting like shit after shit after shit, getting hugged to death by Chang Chamal like matriarch, just constantly died, just thrown into situation after situation. So I really enjoy his character and his kind of like grimdark soldier like humor in the face of all of it. And his interactions with Red Mask is pretty interesting. He's still speculating on why the Kachan Chamal would even choose like having a human or all sword to actually represent them and what that actually all means. But the other thing is just the new way of warfare, where he's like arguing with the Elder about it. You know, it's like not honorable, but if they want to stand any sort of chance, and historically they never have stood a chance against the Lethri, is that they're going to have to like take on these new necessary changes to it, even if like the all think that their style of warfare is more honorable, and it's dishonorable to fight in the new tactical way that he's presenting. But definitely an uneasy alliance between like Talk and one of the elders of the all. They're trying to just figure something out, but it's kind of like they want to keep things the same, but they can't keep things the same just because what has been the same has just like not worked in actually trying to fight the Lethri. Chapter 11. So we are back into Terhal's group, and Ubala now is insistent that he is going to bring Bug and Terhal to Karsa, which is probably my most anticipated convergence to date, just because I really want to see how that's all going to interplay and how Tehel specifically is going to react to Karsa, or vice versa. I think it'll be fun. But we find out that Tehel's plots against the secret police and the Lethri and the Editor in general are working, and everyone is extremely concerned because his plots are known to overthrow economies and just do really crazy things. So excited to see that come to fruition. Errant's still talking and philosophizing about like the nature of the gods and like the holds and the warrens and all of that, and kind of wondering like how Mael actually deals with his followers and how they have just been completely abusing his like aloofness. I don't think most people know that Mael has decided to become Tehel's manservant. So we have seen some consequences. Some people get mad at like Mael specifically for not being there to sort of remember some of the former gods and stuff like names, and that was a big thing with like Bryce that later got transferred to Tehel. So a lot of stuff with him that we really don't know, and just the sort of how the elder god stuff like works in general and how that actually relates to the ascendant ones. But Errant is starting to take note and trying to figure out just sort of what is his place in this new world. He winds up actually meeting up with Featherwitch, and they kind of have an uneasy alliance, and they were talking about like how like the new young Warrens are starting to clash against the Holds, and there was going to be a eventual clash between the Master of the Holds and the Master of the Deck. So it'll be interesting to see how like Perrin loops like back into this. I don't think we've seen him in this book yet, but just the alliance between like him and Featherwitch is going to be pretty crazy. And he immediately tries to kind of betray her and like take her blood, but in the same time she winds up like taking his eye for trying to do that, and now they're kind of like a race to see who can do what kind of like black sorcery first. But he tries to take her blood for power, and at the same time she does a ritual, and that kind of commingles and they sort of combine into some weird connected being of some kind that I don't quite fully understand. But because of that, she's actually able to compel the errant, and she wants to bring back a mortal sword for them in the form of Bryce, whose finger she has been holding onto this whole time. We get to see Karsa start to stomp on the Segula, which we know are some of the best swordsmen out there and have a rigid hierarchy, and he just completely just dominates everyone, and Ikram actually is watching the fight, and when asked like, is he gonna like resume his duel with Karsa, he's just like, no, I don't think so. Which is unfortunate. That was one of the things I was looking forward to in earlier chapters. Maybe it will still happen, but being like halfway through the book now, it's just, I don't think that there's so many things happening that we're going to actually see this come to fruition, which is kind of unfortunate, but I would love to see the reunion at a certain point, because, Karsa is just absolutely going to go for it. And before Featherwitch can actually resurrect Bryce to be her mortal sword, Tranna actually attacks her and takes Bryce's finger, which we'll see what's going to happen with that. I think at this point I started to get into like just like overload of like so many plots to keep in my head, what's going to happen next, and I don't know what to anticipate next. There's so many things to anticipate now, like, oh my god, what are we going to happen now? But and one of the things I was very much looking forward to, Obala finally like sneaks in and gets to meet Karsa. He kneels to him, and Karsa just like backhands him and say the Toplikai kneel to nobody, which was a very cool moment. But then Karsa also gives him a task to go back and start to gather his army of Toplikai. So Karsa, as terrifying as he is simply one Toplikai, so what's going to happen when he finally gets just a massive army of other Toplikai and Tarthanol, and just what's going to happen when he finally has his command of things that he can actually attack with. And this whole time he's been like the knight of the crippled god, and I don't know how knights actually play into everything, but it'll be interesting to see how that's going to play out, especially if he starts to actually gather armies underneath him, because he says he's friends to the Malazan, but if he is serving with the crippled god and he is mad at anyone who will chain him in any type of way whatsoever, where is the loyalty actually going to lie, and what does it actually mean to be a knight of a house? And then this chapter was just like a big setup of just the constant kind of things to anticipate. We know that Rulad and Ikram are going to face against each other, maybe Ikram and Karsa. We know that Errant and Perrin now are going to have to face each other. Karsa and Ubala are going to go off and like start forming like the Toplikai army, and then you have Tehel starting to face off against the secret police, and this plan's going to motion. So this chapter would just seem to like be a big recap just to remind you the sheer amount of things that are happening that will hopefully resolve in this book, or at least explode and start new things to resolve in the next book. And to finish things off, we get into chapter 12, and this was a very exciting, fun chapter to get through. We start off with like Brol and just him completely ignoring all the signs as he's about to like attack the the All and Red Mask just ignoring every sign and just being like, things have always worked out, like this is going to be exactly the same, and just completely ignoring everything that they're going to just absolutely get wrecked, and wrecked they do. But before we even get there, we get to see, some of the All confront talk about like if he's actually going to stay or if he's going to go, also making fun of his stone arrows, not realizing that they're IMAS magical arrows, and just trying to figure out, what are you going to do during this battle? Are you just going to run away? Like Red Mask is going to kill you. And he's like, good luck. Wouldn't be the first thing that tried to kill me that was way more overpowered than me. We go back to Hedge, who meets an IMAS, who talks about just more into the philosophy things, about just how like the whole ritual to fight the Jagged and then how their vengeance just completely ruined their race. And we saw the effect that now they were just a shambling undead horde that had like just a full-on like mission that they were just drawn to and just not really completely individual because of that. But kind of cool to like jump back into that right before we're getting to a major battle, just because the All are absolutely singing vengeance against the Lethery. So I thought that was like a nice juxtaposition between the two. Udinasan's dreams too starts to almost get poached by the Errants, just trying to have him become one of the members of his like new like house or hold or whatever you want to call it. Weird amalgamation of just this and that, and then Menador shows up just to like claim him as his own prize, and Aaron's just like, whatever, just like take him. But then Udinas, just within his own dreams, sort of banishes him somehow. Not fully explained, but you see him taking more power for himself and still very angry at all the things that have been done to him. But he never really quite wakes up, and so the group actually starts like trying to figure out like why it is, and how like they're now exploring Kachain Kachamal like ruins, and how that dinosaur sorcerer may actually be affecting him deeply. The rest of this chapter is just Red Mask. He chose a place where the Lethery sorcery just really wouldn't work because it's where the ritual of the IMAS took place, so magic just gets like sucked in there. And he proceeds to just like ambush them and just complete wreak havoc on them. Not only is he using the new tactics and new type of equipment and stuff that's not the terrible stuff he had before, but he also has the Kachain Jamal hunters just running in there and just like decimating everything. And surprisingly, Brol calls a retreat, but then he actually lets them go. So I'm sure they're happy with their victory, but there's gonna be probably some tactical reasons why that happened that will be revealed later. But very satisfying after just seeing Brol talk so much shit to have like Red Mask just show up and just do Red Mask Savage war things. Very fun to get through. But book 2, it started out really strong for me. I like this better than I liked book 1 for sure, as I'm more invested, but we still got heavy into philosophy. I thought there were more action chapters in this, and some of the things that were being set up were just extremely exciting. So I'm definitely excited to continue reading book 3. And I should have that out way faster now that I'm not traveling and using equipment that I normally use. So hopefully I don't have to record that one in 3 times, but expect that pretty shortly. But thanks for listening to me ramble. I have 2 more books to get through before I release the big video, but this is definitely something I'm trying to prioritize just to be done with it and to start getting in deeper into the Malazan. We're near the finish, even if the page count does not actually mean it that, but it's been fun trying to get through. But thanks and take it easy.